Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. All right, everybody, I'm back. Good to be back. Good to be back. I do want to switch gears, and I want to kind of talk about the story that just won't go away, and I don't think it's going away at any point in the near future, and that is college sports realignment. This is a story that is ever evolving. It is fascinating. It is changing the way we consume, watch, and think about college sports. And I don't know if there's ever going to be a finish line to it. But over the course of the weekend, we got two very interesting stories from two very clear parties that are not happy with their setup. We are going to talk about the poor Pac-12, which I think they're a deep, you know what, in a minute. But before we get to the Pac-12, I do want to start with what I thought was actually a very interesting story out of Florida State University. Florida State, we all know, Tomahawk Chop, Bobby Bowden, Florida State football, and they're really kind of coming off of a really Renaissance-type season under Mike Norvell this past season, 10-3 overall, win the bowl game, and there was a lot of buzz about Florida State football going into this season, the most buzz that they've had in a while. Well, they are currently in the ACC on the outside looking in. And as I've said from day one, hour one, minute one, since Texas and Oklahoma left for the SEC, and then shortly thereafter, a year or so later, USC and UCLA left for the Big Ten, everybody who is not in the Big Ten or the SEC is trying to figure out, how do we get in there and how do we get a cut of that massive TV revenue? Well, on Friday, Michael Alford, the Florida State athletic director, was speaking to his board of trustees, and a lot of the information that he was speaking about actually leaked out. But essentially, what his whole conversation came down to was this: Florida State is not happy with their setup in the ACC, and Florida State is desperately trying to get one of two things done with the ACC. One, they're just trying to get out. And we're going to talk about it in a minute. I don't know if that's very likely. Or two, they're trying to figure out a way, how do we maybe set up an uneven distribution model? In other words, the biggest brands, the Florida States, the Clemsons, the Miamis, maybe the North Carolinas and Dukes, I don't know. How do those schools get a bigger chunk of the pie than the Syracuses and the Pitts and the Wake Forest and the Boston Colleges that most people don't care about? So that was essentially what the conversation was about. But well, I would like to sit here and tell Florida State fans that this is all going to get worked out and everything's going to be okay and everything's going to be good. I don't know if that's the case. The Florida State AD can want whatever he wants. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And I think this is a fascinating story, taking you behind the scenes on the stress levels that come right now from every college fan base that is not currently in the SEC or the Big Ten as they try to figure out the future of college sports. And so let's get into it. And really, to understand Florida State's situation, you really have to understand the ACC situation. And obviously, like every conference over the last probably 2 decades, they've seen a lot of turnover and turmoil in their conference. Now, some of it was they created the turmoil, adding Syracuse and adding through, really over the last 20 years, Miami in football and Virginia Tech in football, Boston College, Syracuse, Pitt, etc. But they also lost Maryland. And shortly after they lost Maryland and really kind of what was a quiet time in conference realignment a few years back, they had their TV deal come up. And basically, to protect themselves, to make sure that nobody was going to take their best teams, the way that they took other people's best teams, the way that the SEC just took Texas and Oklahoma, etc., the ACC put in a wild TV contract to make sure to keep all of the schools in the conference together. The TV contract, are you ready for this? It runs through the 2036 calendar year. So in other words, the ACC schools that are currently there are contractually obligated to stay together for another 13 years. Another 13 years. And keep in mind, they signed for dollar amounts, a couple of years ago that are nothing quite like what the Big Ten and the SEC were going to get. Now, listen, the Big Ten and the SEC are completely different behemoths, but the ACC went first. And as this AD, Florida State's Michael Alford, said, we're going to be at such a deficit. I don't know how we can keep up as an athletic department. He pointed out smartly, I think very smartly, we're going to fall behind at some points about $30 million a year in TV revenue. And it's not just $30 million. It's $30 million year after year after year. So even the worst teams in the SEC, even the Vanderbilts, even the Mississippi States, even the Purdue's and Illinois and Iowa's in the Big Ten, they're going to be making not only $30 million more than us in TV revenue, they're going to be making $30 million more every single season. And we're going to fall behind. And here's the other part. All of those TV contracts are up before the ACC's is. So I don't mean to get nerdy here, but the Big Ten just signed for roughly $80 million a year per school every season, 70 to 80, depending on what number you have. And their contract actually ends. They're going to be able to renegotiate for more money before the ACC's come up. So this is a bad contract. This is a bad deal. And Florida State is basically freaking out. And I think he actually has a pretty strong argument as to why something needs to be changed. Basically, his argument is, listen, one, we'd like to get out of this TV contract and explore our options. The number ballpark is like 120 or so million, which we'll explain in a minute. But then two, he's basically saying, look, if we got to stay, we have to work with this league and figure out a way to get uneven distribution to get us more money than everybody else. And he points out to a couple very interesting numbers. He basically said over the course of the college football playoff era, so since 2014 to 2022, Florida State averages 70% more viewers on average than the average ACC school. And we're coming off a year where, even in a year where Florida State came in unranked, not a lot of hype, they still had 3 of the highest rated games in the ACC this season, 7+ million for their Black Friday game against Florida, way more for their Sunday season opener against LSU. And he's basically saying, like, we're falling way behind in this ACC. We got to figure out a way to get out. But if we don't, we got to make sure that we're getting a situation money-wise that's commensurate with what we bring. In other words, why are we going to get the same amount as Boston College when Boston College isn't bringing nearly as many eyeballs to TVs as we are? So that was what the whole conversation was about. But now, I hate to say it, I'm going to rain on the parade of every Florida State fan and every Florida State administrator, because I don't see them getting out of the TV deal. I don't see them getting out of the ACC, and I don't see the league itself rearranging its TV rights. Listen, we all want things in life. I want somebody to pay me millions of dollars to go sit on a beach and drink cold drinks every day. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, and I think Florida State is kind of stuck where they are. In terms of just leaving the ACC, I think we essentially have to eliminate that as even a remote possibility, okay? Because as I said, the second that Texas and Oklahoma decided to leave for the SEC, I told you on this show, I said every school that's not in the Big Ten and not in the SEC is trying to figure out a way to get to one of those two conferences. If you remember, my buddy Mark Ryan, radio host in South Carolina, he reported that Clemson and Florida State had discussions with the SEC. He got crushed by all the Big J media. But he was 100%. I said he was 100% right, because of course everybody is having discussions. Everybody's trying to figure out how to get out. But when you do that, you have to go through the TV contract and figure out a way to get out of this contract that runs another 13 years. Well, here's the problem. It's really hard to get out of a contract that was written in such a way that it was like just think about this at the most basic level, okay? So if you're the ACC 4, 5, 6 years ago, you want to make sure that nobody can get out of a contract to leave your conference anytime soon. You are going to write an airtight contract that makes it impossible for anybody to leave. That was the contract that was put in place. And of course, that was the contract that was put in place, because of course, that's the contract that you want. So no, it's not easy to get out of this contract because it was written that way at the request of all 15 schools in the ACC, or 14 plus Notre Dame, whatever you want to say. It was written this way, so it wasn't easy to get out of. I guarantee you, the legal counsels of some of these schools, my guess would probably be North Carolina, maybe Virginia, Clemson, Florida State, Miami. They've been trying to figure out a way out of this contract for probably 2 years now, and it's not happening. And it's because the contract was written in such a way that you're not supposed to be able to get out of it to keep everybody together. So that's one. I think it's also worth noting, by the way. I know I saw some people throw out a number of, well, Texas and Oklahoma are paying $100 million to get out of that Big 12 contract. And so maybe Florida State could just write a check for 100 or 120 million. Here's the problem. One, there was only 1 year left on the Big 12 contract. Two, the Big 12 was the one that wanted them out of the conference. We talked about it when it was announced that Texas and Oklahoma are leaving a year ahead of schedule. The Big 12 wanted them out. The ACC doesn't want Florida State out. And so my understanding is if the ACC just says no, you can pay whatever you want, but you do not own your broadcast rights until 2036. And so you can leave. You can pay $1 million or $100 million or $1 billion to leave the ACC. But you won't control your broadcast rights. Your new conference won't own your broadcast rights. And so because of it, you're kind of just stuck where you are. You can pay whatever you want to leave, but if you can't broadcast your games, if your games can't be broadcast anywhere, then it doesn't matter. Now, the uneven distribution of revenue part, that one's interesting as well. And I hope I'm not nerding out too hard, but this is a very important story in the college sports ecosystem. And the uneven revenue distribution is basically, again, Florida State saying, we make way more for this conference than Boston College or Syracuse or Pitt. No disrespect to any Boston College fan that's listening if they exist, but it's the truth. But the problem with now going to the ACC and saying we want to renegotiate this deal is the deal is in place because you agreed to it and because every school in the conference agreed to it. And so you can't now go to the ACC because remember, the ACC knows you have nowhere to go. They know that the contract is written in such a way that's basically like, you're stuck with us till 2036. Now imagine going to the ACC and saying, okay, well, if we're stuck till 2036 and there's nothing we can do, but we want you to redo the TV deal so that we get a bigger share than Boston College or Syracuse. Boston College and Syracuse are going to say no way. And the ACC is going to say no way for one simple reason. It's because you, Florida State, as an institution, agreed to it. It's because you agreed to it. It's because you agreed to it. So why is Boston College going to give up money to a contract that you agreed to? I'll give you a really terrible example, but I think it's apples to apples. Imagine you and I decide to open up. Are you ready for this? Let's say we open up a hair salon, me and you, and we agree for the next 13 years, we are going to split revenues 50-50 on this thing. And we have a contract that we both agree to, that we have decided that no matter what happens, we each get 50% of the revenue. Now imagine that we open up this salon and a year, 2 years, 6 months in, 80 or 90% of the requests, let's just say 70%, because Florida State rates 70% better than the average ACC team. Let's say 70% of all the hair appointment requests come for you. And you come to me and say, I'm creating 70% of the revenue here, maybe even more, because I'm taking non-requests as well. I want a bigger cut of the pie. It's a very admirable thing. It's an understandable thing. And you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say, I got this little piece of paper right here. See this? I'm crumpling it up in my hands. I got that piece of paper right there. And I don't really care what you do. You can't go anywhere because this contract that we agreed to says that we're stuck in this place next 13 years. You can't go to another salon. You can't go to another place. You can't rent out another building. You're stuck here. That's where the ACC is at. And in this example, you might be Florida State and I might be Boston College, but Boston College is getting that same check. So it's a fascinating story. And I think it speaks to just where we are in realignment right now. Listen, I've said it. Everybody wants to be in the Big Ten or the SEC. I've been saying that for a year and a half. I've been saying that since the second in July of 2020, when Texas and Oklahoma announced they were leaving for the SEC. But just because you want something doesn't mean you're going to get it. And Florida State fans, I hate to say it, I think you're in deep, deep, deep trouble on this one.